practice speed and everything else, you got to slow things down a little bit for the new guys, no matter how sharp they are, like a Rylan Godey or a Brett Seither. So when you add another guy in there that can nod his head and says, Coach, I got it, after one teaching point, coaching point, that's what you want. Georgia wants to play a lot of tight ends. I think the big picture here with Eli Wolf is just depth and championship depth.
So I think that's really interesting from Jeff. It's almost like what he's saying is the transfer players, veteran players, are just easier than young players to get acclimated. That's true for the guy that Jeff is referencing there, Wolf, the tight end that Georgia adds from Tennessee. I think it's also true for Cager, the wide receiver that Georgia is going to add from Miami. This, by the way, Cager, also a guy that's put up some stats as well. He's found the end zone in his Miami career, playing with inferior quarterbacks, the one he'll play with at Georgia and Jake Fromm. So I think there's a lot to like with the Cager addition and the Cager move for Georgia. Now, I know there's always going to be that pumping of the brakes from some Georgia fans and say, yeah, well, those veteran players may do better in practice with those reps, and they may pick up the offense and learn that faster just because they got college experience. But, B.A., what about the transfers that didn't pan out for Georgia? What about the guys that were brought in, maybe like a Jay Hayes on last year's defense or a DeMarcus Hayes, a junior college transfer along the offensive line? What about those guys that get brought in here and don't make the significant impacts right away? Listen, or in some cases may never make them. There is no such thing as batting 1,000. There's no such thing as every single person working out to the height of what his potential was. College recruiting in many ways is about casting as wide a net as you possibly can. And I'm going to assume that the presence of Cage or the presence of Wolf helps Georgia next season. If nothing else, it increases the depth that Georgia will be going through its practices with. It increases the competition to actually get on the field. And if a Wolf or a Cager ultimately get beaten out by younger players, by less experienced players, that only means that the bar those younger players had to cross to get on the field was higher than it otherwise would have been. So I think you can, as a Georgia fan, feel really good here that Georgia, with its conclusion to its 2019 recruiting cycle, went out and got an elite 5-star wide receiver, and then on the heels of that, brought in a couple of more transfer players, had the scholarship room to do this, and all of a sudden, when you look up and down this Georgia roster, offense, defense, everything in between, special teams as well, if you want to include a Lou Groza-level kicker and Rodrigo Blankenship, what would a team need to have to win a national championship that Georgia doesn't currently have, or at least has a strong potential of having? What do national champions typically have that Georgia doesn't? There may be some answers to that question. We may wrestle with that a lot over the course of the offseason, especially as we head towards spring practice. But at first glance, the general thought is this Georgia team on paper looks really good. Maybe a whole lot closer to Alabama and Clemson, the two teams that just played for a national championship, than many fans outside the bubble of DawgNation and many of the national media may realize. This Georgia team's in pretty good shape right now. The transfer additions, I think, ensure that even more. And the 2019 season around DawgNation could be really fun indeed. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, radio at noon, of course, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. And we are available as a podcast pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And if you have not signed up to subscribe to the DawgNation Daily podcast on the Apple Podcast Player, what a convenient way to have the on-demand version of our audio delivered right there to you in your earbuds on your device. However, a great way to connect the show is DawgNation Daily as a podcast. Subscribe on the Apple Podcast Player. We'd love to have you do that. Chip Towers coming up in just a moment. Chip was in the room today at Holy Spirit Preparatory Academy when the nation's #2 basketball prospect, Anthony Edwards, chose Georgia. We'll talk to him about that. We'll also get into some of the football stuff with Chip as well. Before that, though, let me go in on Edwards myself for a second as we go around the doghouse here on this Monday, brought to you by Pella Window and Door. And I kind of joked about this off the top of our program with the props that I brought on the set today. And when we were on video, I kind of, for the Edwards announcement earlier, I kind of remarked about how unusual it is for us to be doing this for a basketball announcement. We normally get together for these Kroger recruiting specials and their football announcements. They're elite 5-star football players, and Edwards, a basketball player. But nonetheless, it was a really cool moment, I think, for Georgia basketball to see Edwards as he unzipped the nephew of his, the little baby wearing the sweatsuit, unzips that to reveal what I believe was a Georgia bib on the young baby that was there with Edwards. A really cool moment. After that, family emerged wearing all the Georgia T-shirts, and Edwards himself put on his own Georgia hat. It was actually a really nice moment to see the Georgia G, which has long been a representation of the top level of college football, and over the last couple of years, one of the most recognizable symbols in all of college football for its presence in the college football playoff, the last 2 SEC championship games. Kirby Smart has done wonders with that Georgia football brand over the last couple of years. And for Crean, all of a sudden now making quick work to make the Georgia basketball brand seem really big and really relevant as we move into the 2020 and beyond. What a cool moment there that was for that. We'll have more with Chip Towers on this in just a minute. And I guess from my own mindset, I can't help but remark about how the Edwards news comes really just 48 hours after Crean himself made a pretty controversial statement. Now, when Edwards was asked about what Crean had said on Saturday, he kind of brushed it off, seemingly didn't take it as being all that much of a big deal. But I've been really amazed by how much reaction there has been to Crean's criticism of his own players on Saturday. We'll let you hear it from Crean himself in just a moment, essentially blaming them for some of the problems that Georgia's had this season. There had been some even curiosity among Georgia fans of what Crean had said on Saturday. Is that going to injure Georgia's chances of getting Edwards today? We found out today that's not going to be the case, but if you're wondering what's all the fuss is about from what Crean had to say, I'm going to let you go back and hear him on Saturday saying the responsibility for Georgia basketball is on him because he kept players that apparently don't deserve to be here. This is a volatile statement from Crean that got a really strong reaction. I'm going to let you hear it.
It's all on me because I'm the one who decided to keep these guys. It's all on me. And I get it because the last thing I can do with making decisions on keeping guys in the program in the spring, okay, is now get overly mad at them because I'm the one that made the decision. So I live with that every day. And it doesn't mean that they're not great kids. But very few programs, when there's a takeover, okay, when you have guys that haven't done it at any point in time really in their career, a lot of those guys, they move on. That's what happens in a job change, and I didn't do that. And so I'm not going to complain, and we just got to keep doing everything we can do to fix it and make it better.
The summary of what Crean seems to be saying there is, I should have kicked some of these players off the team, and I didn't. And since I didn't, I've got to live with the decision that I made. At least one parent of a current player found those statements to be pretty disappointing, and she said as much on Twitter over the weekend. You may have seen that. And I guess my overall takeaway in terms of how this ties back in the Anthony Edwards news is this is what the longtime political columnist Michael Kinsley was famous for, called a Kinsley gaffe. When you accidentally tell the truth, that's what a Kinsley gaffe is thought to be in politics, when a politician slips up and accidentally tells the truth. I think in the case of Crean, that's what he's done. I think he has accidentally told the truth. Now, I'm not watching Georgia basketball this year close enough to know the players in this roster shouldn't be there, which ones he might be referencing, and which ones should have been kicked off the team. I won't pretend to know that necessarily. But what Crean is saying publicly may have been accidentally revealed to the public, but privately, this kind of thing goes on in college athletics all the time. And for someone like Crean, and I said this on our Before the Hedges recruiting special a moment ago when Anthony Edwards chose UGA, Crean is among the most media-savvy coaches in all of college athletics, not just college basketball, but college football. In addition to being a coach that's been pretty friendly with the media, while he was out of coaching, he was in the media. This is a guy who knows how to say what he means, and presumably he means what he says. I don't think this is the kind of thing that Crean would have said on accident, and I don't think this is the kind of thing that he would have said if he thought it was going to jeopardize him with Anthony Edwards. It's been spun in some circles as, oh, this is just Crean showing frustration because Georgia played badly against Ole Miss on a Saturday where ex-Georgia basketball players and former dignitaries around the program were back on campus. But Crean's not going to lose his tongue that way. Crean's too polished with his own spoken words to slip up and say something he's later on going to regret. To me, this feels more like a deliberate message to say the talent level that you're used to seeing around Georgia basketball is not the talent that I'm going to be bringing to the program. I'm going to have less guys like on this roster right now and more guys like Anthony Edwards. Now, that may be distasteful in terms of Crean blaming the players for the level of success that Georgia's had this year. That's probably a different discussion all the way around. I think Crean is just admitting what he believes is true, which is a talent upgrade is necessary. And by the way, as I said before, it's not just Georgia basketball who wrestles with this kind of stuff and goes through this kind of stuff. Y'all know around here we're friends with our buddy Mike Johnson, the former Alabama All-American. What Tom Crean said publicly is something that Alabama coach Nick Saban apparently did and said privately. Now, maybe you can say that Saban was better for keeping this private than Crean was for making it public, but let me let you hear Mike Johnson describe what Nick Saban told the Alabama team behind closed doors in a private meeting when he first took the job. Crean says publicly, I should have run some guys off when I got this job. Nick Saban apparently told the Alabama players privately that's exactly what he intended to do. Here's Mike Johnson relaying a story about Nick Saban.
There was a group of guys that weren't buying in, and you know what he said? As soon as we can replace you, we will replace you. And he went out and got the number one recruiting class in the class of 2008, and he did just that. He replaced those guys that didn't want to buy in.
As soon as we can replace you, we will replace you. So if you have a problem with this, you don't have a problem with Crean, I believe, as much as you have a problem with college athletics. This has long been a transactional relationship. It now exists for both program and player. Players can transfer and move where they want to go, and coaches, no matter what they may say publicly, are always privately behind closed doors trying to decide who fits our program, who's going to help get us over the hump, and how can we get rid of someone that's not doing that. That's just the state of play in the game now when it comes to college athletics. I think Crean's public words, whether they intended them to do this or not, is just a revelation of what actually goes on behind closed doors. We'll get more from Chip Towers on this in a moment, and we should also probably add that it certainly helps Crean's point to go out and add a big player like the one that Georgia's added with Anthony Edwards. So we'll talk all about that. Of course, Around the Doghouse here, brought to you by Pella Window and Door. You know, they can help equip your house with energy-efficient windows and doors. Now, the great thing about Pella Window is they're a national company, but they are also a local branch right here in Georgia. So that means you get the power of the national company backed by the locally owned branch right here in the state of Georgia. And right now they got a great offer for you. You can currently get up to 40% off qualifying installations or 0% APR for 48 months. That's valid, though, through March 28th. So you need to act right now to take advantage of that great offer. And there are a couple different ways you can get in touch with Pella Window and Door. You can find them online at pellasoutheast.us. That, once again, is pellasoutheast.us. Or you can give them a call in their Dunwoody showroom at 404-445-2979. It's 404-445-2979. Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best. All right, we got a lot more come on the football storylines going around Georgia football. But for more reaction to the big basketball news, as Anthony Edwards commits to Georgia just a few minutes ago, let's talk to Chip Towers, who was in the room with Edwards here on DawgNation Daily.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So hello to Chip Towers, who was at Holy Spirit Preparatory Academy earlier on Monday morning as Anthony Edwards made his college choice of Georgia over Kentucky. And, Chip, you've been covering UGA athletics for a long time. I don't know how many basketball recruiting ceremonies you've been to because I don't know how many have ever risen to the level of the interest that Edwards has, given his status as a premier prospect, future #1 overall draft pick in the NBA draft, quite likely. What was it like to be in the room with Edwards today?
Well, it was a really cool scene, BA, and really felt kind of historical. Not to sound, too grandiose or anything about it, but it was a real who's who in there when it comes to kind of the Atlanta basketball scene, when it comes to basketball recruiting scene. Obviously, we live streamed it. Probably a half dozen other entities live streamed it or broadcasted it. There was a lot of bright light, a lot of attention, and it was Georgia basketball. It was not a Georgia football recruit. We're obviously used to seeing that with, you going live to Jeff Sentell and him revealing the news, but this was different. And not only was it a big-time, basketball recruit, but this was arguably, and I had some extended conversations with some of these basketball recruiting analysts as we wrapped up over there, arguably the #1 basketball prospect in America. Now, you can quibble over it, at this very moment, he's #2 in the 24/7, compilation, which is the generally accepted trend. But 24/7 has him as #1 guy. The Rivals guys were telling me, they really think he's #1. I don't know if or when they'll reset this, but for Georgia to sign, get a commitment from, let's be straight about it, the #1 basketball recruit in America is a big deal. And I was talking to D.A. Lane. I'm writing about this at DawgNation in my Tower State column. He's the last player to sign with Georgia out of Wheeler High School. He's an AAU guy, runs his own camp and everything, and he's just going, Chip, this is a game changer, man. This is a game changer, man. And that's what it felt like. It felt like a game changer. We'll see. Don't want to put too much pressure on the guy. He's still got to play. He's still only going to be a freshman next year. But it felt like that maybe a dam was broken or some walls fell down here on Monday morning.
And I want to talk to you about that point in particular because you used the phrase historic, which I understand where you're coming from on that. DA uses the phrase game changer. I understand where he's coming from on that. I mean, if you look at the recent track record in college basketball, there's a chance that Edwards on the court for Georgia actually doesn't impact the win-loss record next year as much as some people might think. However, by opening the door to this Atlanta AAU scene, which for whatever reason Mark Fox, Dennis Felton, coaches like that were just not really a part of, by all of a sudden creating that pipeline, and Edwards himself referenced the closeness to his school, to his home, to the Athens campus, and the comfort he has with Tom Crean. All of a sudden, that might put Georgia in the conversation for more of these guys, which Atlanta seems to produce regularly. So this may be one of those things where the history-making aspect of this might not be felt on the floor next year, but for the next 5 to 10 years, these kinds of Anthony Edwards commitment decisions might not be such a rarity anymore.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's the deal out of it. This wasn't as much about Anthony Edwards coming to Georgia as it was about him not going to Kentucky, not going to North Carolina, not going to Duke, not going to Kansas, right? I mean, he's staying in state, he's going to Georgia, and he's answering Tom Crean's call, which he's been fairly outspoken about, is, hey, you can do all that here. You can do that here. Come here and do that. You don't need to go to Kentucky and have to fly back and forth and fly your family back and forth. Yeah, you can get it done right here. Look at my track record. Look at the players I've had. Come and let's do it here, and you can have all the advantages of home in the same breath. And that's certainly what, if you know Anthony Edwards' story, Ant-Man, as a lot of people like to call him, you understand why family's really close to him, really important to him, why he wants to stay close for the family. He had his little nephew, Jace, in his lap for the announcement, and that's a big deal. And so it's about Anthony Edwards and whatever he can do for Georgia next year, but it's also about whatever doors this may open. He referenced after your live stream, I said, are you going to recruit other players to Georgia? And he's like, absolutely. And he's like, you know who? I got 2 guys in mind right now. So there should be a bit of a Pied Piper effect. That's certainly the hope for Tom Crean.
All right, so let me ask you about one more thing, because you actually saw him play the other night, and we've been watching some video highlights on our show here today. Certainly from my vantage point, this is no educated opinion. It's just me looking at him. He's a lot of fun to watch. He gets up and down the floor. He dunks with ease. Chip, no matter what the win-loss record for Georgia next season is going to be, I would imagine Edwards is going to be a huge fan favorite and filling the stands a lot. Tell me about what it was like to watch him play in person, because he seems to play the game the way that you love to see it played, flying around, dunking, and just really a beautiful player to watch.
Yeah, he really is. And the thing about it, in like pregame warm-up, I mean, Holy Spirit has a lot of great players, right? They had a couple other guys that are, 6'7", 6'8", 6'9", and you couldn't really tell a difference. But as soon as the whistle blew, it's like, oh, yeah, okay, I see. The guy's just all over the place, commanding the ball, making plays. He is a playmaker in every sense of the word. He moves as easily and effortlessly with his left hand as his right. He moves to the left or the right. He's got that, the NBA move where he can just as easily step back on you and knock down a long NBA three as he can to just blow by you. And once he gets, he's one of those guys who gets up in the air and then he decides what he's going to do with the ball. Okay, I'm up here now. What am I going to do with it? And so he's the type of guy, there's no question, that Georgia fans who are already coming out to watch the Bulldogs in pretty good numbers under Tom Crean, they're going to want to come just to watch this guy play. The other side that I'm learning about him here today and then after that game the other night is, he's a pretty polished guy. And he's the type that he knows what his station is. So when their games get over at Holy Spirit Prep, and you'll see this in the state tournament going on, he stays there afterwards and he takes pictures with all of them. He smiles and he chats them up, and he speaks well and he's eloquent. And when you know this guy's backstory, it's really incredible. It's one of those stories where you can tell that a game has very much made a difference in a guy's life and, made a difference for good. And so he's impressive. He's magnetic, and I imagine he's going to make players better on the court and bring better players to the court, if that makes sense.
So the irony to all this is that the Edwards announcement comes just a couple days after Tom Crean said something that's gotten a lot of attention, and certainly not all of it positive. Now, Edwards was asked about Crean's seeming criticism of his team, almost blaming them for the struggles this season, and what I heard Edwards say on our video is to kind of blow that off and make it not seem like that big of a deal. Chip, what did you make of Crean on Saturday blaming the Georgia failure this season on the fact that he should have run some players off and chose not to do that? How did that sit with you hearing that from Tom Crean?
Yeah, obviously I'm going to weigh in on it. And I reported it. I was covering the game, and I reported it in my right-through story after the game Saturday night. I did think it got a little bit blown out of proportion, and particularly by some people who weren't even attending the news conference, to be quite frank about it. But in the whole time before he said whatever it was, the 50 or 100 words that have been pulled out by everybody and talked about, was his fault. It's his job. He's not doing a good job coaching. He put everything on himself. And then, when he continued to be pushed about it, actually, the diatribe started when he was talking about all the turnovers, and it really got into, he's just talking about, hey, I knew what kind of players I had, and so it's on me, that we're going out there and committing 20 turnovers, that's on me. So, I thought it got a little bit, but let me be clear about it. He should have never said it. And I'm talking to Tom Crean later this afternoon. I'm on my way back to Athens from Buckhead right now. And I feel sure that he's going to express some regret about saying what he said and saying it how he said it. The flip side of that, he's also sort of telling the truth, right? I mean, in this age of the transfer portal, when guys can leave anytime they want to, and all that comes with, there's a flip side to that as well. And what Tom Crean's saying is I got to get better players, and I'm going to get better players. In my understanding, BA, here's the story behind the story a little bit, is yesterday on Sunday, I understand Georgia had one of the best practices that they've had all year long. The team is unified. No, this is not a divisive thing. And obviously with Ant-Man coming to Athens, it didn't ruin their recruiting and blow up, Georgia basketball, as a lot of these hyperbolic posts and outrage would have you believe. No, I think it might have actually solidified Georgia basketball a little bit, to be honest with you.
So I want to talk about football before we let you go, but let me follow up on this real quick, and I'm obviously a lot more comfortable speculating than you are, but my speculation on this particular story is, Chip, Crean is too media savvy, given his own background working in the media and his friendliness with the media. He's too media savvy to have a true gaffe. In other words, accidentally saying something in the heat of a moment. He's been in front of cameras and microphones, in my mind, too much to do that. If Crean chose to say this on Saturday, my assumption is that he said it intentionally. Do you feel comfortable speculating about that one way or another?
Well, no, I'm not comfortable about that because he's a very emotional guy. I mean, he just says what's on his mind, and it's gonna be this. Hey, I heard this about Tom Crean before he got here. A guy I respect a lot, Rick Bosich, who's covered Tom Crean at Indiana and also covers Kentucky, so covered him and I believe his son actually covered Indiana while Crean was there. And this is a guy. Anybody who talks a lot, right? This, you're on the air all the time. You're going to say stuff that you probably shouldn't have said, and you didn't mean to say. He's passionate. Yeah. And he was frustrated. Let me tell you, they did not play. I was at that game, and that was like, we're like looking at each other, guys on press row. It's like, wow. Georgia's been bad at times, but they were really bad, and he was embarrassed. There were 90 Lettermen there, a bunch of those guys that had played on SEC championship teams and Final Fours, and they're standing there, and your guys come out and lay an egg like that. I mean, he was embarrassed, and, he said some stuff he probably should have, but I think he's going to own up to it, and that's why I'm on my way to hear from him now. I'm going to give him a chance. Okay, you said what you said. how do you feel about it now? I'm fairly sure that we'll probably hear an apology of some sort, and probably hear a little bit about that practice.
It's unusual for us to be, almost 13 minutes into an interview and not gotten to football yet, but I do want to talk a couple things about football. Chip, speaking as a fan, I was really glad about the Lawrence Cager news. Now, obviously at Georgia, we have seen some grad transfers come in and make huge impacts. Other guys don't always do it, but I think that wide receiver could be the missing piece for Georgia next season. Pickens, assuming everything works out with him, is certainly an answer for that in the 2019 class. But a guy like Cager, who put up some stats with what I think of as pretty inferior quarterback play in Miami, I think that's a pretty fun addition for Georgia. When you pair this with Eli Wolf, it certainly seems like Georgia's going all in with what it thinks is a really talented roster for 2019, right?
Well, listen, BA, I'm a DawgNation Daily regular, okay? And I know where you are on this subject, man. I do. I know exactly where you stand. And I agree, to an extent. I mean, there is no question. Let me tell you, Georgia got better, at the wide receiver position, or at least they replaced where they needed to, because, I don't think it's that small of a thing that you're losing McCole Hardman and Riley Ridley and Terry Godwin. I mean, those are really, J.J. Hallman did a great job, and maybe statistically some other guys might have put up some better numbers. Those are really your three best receivers, most dependable, know what they're doing, know what the routes are, most dynamic, and all that kind of stuff. In between, Blaylock and Pickens, and then a guy like Cager. A guy like Cager is a guy who come in. I mean, he's what does Jeff like to call him? Plug and play,
yeah.
Right? And same thing with Eli Wolf. I mean, he's going to know immediately, what his job is, what he can do. And I think one of the most important things that could possibly happen right now is for, Cager to get in there, Eli Wolf to get in there and start throwing, with Jake Fromm the way they do in the summer. And they're going to throw the ball a ton. They're going to have all that 7-on-7 stuff and kind of build up a rapport. And if they can, they're going to be able to hit the ground running when Georgia plays that first game, 1st of September.
Let me squeeze in one final question, Chip. You know that Justin Fields was granted his immediate eligibility over the weekend. Some Georgia fans were kind of questioning how easy this process seemed to be for Ohio State. But one way or another, do you think that Georgia, the institution itself, the Athletic Association, is it just glad to have this thing over, clean break, Fields is Ohio State's quarterback now, Georgia's moving on, and the kind of repetition of the news cycle about to go away now? Is Georgia just glad to have this over now?
Yeah, no, I think they are. And look, Brandon, this is the new world. And, I would remind Georgia fans that, Georgia was one of the precedent setters on this, right? Demetrius Robinson, came in and was granted immediate eligibility. And this is what the new world is going to be like. And, there's a lot of controversy about what his reasons and all that kind of stuff. And this is actually another story that I'm going to weigh in on in the next 24 hours, I would say, on DawgNation. They're very vague. NCAA, when you get down in the weeds about what it takes to transfer now, it's a very broad, vague basis. And, I thought it was good, and I'm sure Georgia was glad to see Justin Fields say what he said, and all of us realized the hypocrisy of all that with his sister still being here playing softball, and then, him, going out under whatever pretenses he went out. But the bottom line is you can just say now that you are having a negative experience for whatever reason, and you're probably going to get that check mark, on your transfer papers. That's just the way it is now. But Georgia moves on, and I'm not sure. I wrote this in the immediate aftermath of Justin Fields leaving. In some ways, I know he's a great player, and maybe he goes to Ohio State and proves to be that generational player that I've heard so much about. But I think this may be a unifying factor in Georgia's football team. There's not going to be any question who your quarterback is. Everybody else is going to be either a pure backup like Stetson Bennett is, or a developmental project as Dwan Mathis is. Jake Fromm is your man. There's no question about it. He's going to get all the reps. He's going to be calling all the shots. And I think that's largely a good thing for Georgia football.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, Chip. All right, we'll look forward to reading a bunch from you. Sounds like coming up at DawgNation.com. That's going to be a lot of fun. We appreciate your time today. A historic moment for Georgia basketball earlier on this Monday, and we enjoyed your coverage of that. Chip, we'll talk to you soon.
All right. See you, man.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Great stuff, and it was really fun to be on for basketball this morning, and I love the audience response to it. You know, listen, we will never be anything other than what we are, a show that does about 95 to 99% football content, for better or for worse. That's just what we are, both in terms of, listen, we just like college football around here, and also we understand that's what a lot of our audience really, really likes. But that doesn't mean there isn't room in our brains and our minds and our attention span for something else, especially when it really gives you a reason to talk about it. And when Georgia goes out and gets a player like the caliber of the Ant-Man, Anthony Edwards, obviously it's going to generate a discussion. That was a really fun thing to be a part of today. Hope we enjoyed Dog Nation's live coverage of Anthony Edwards' decision, courtesy of our friends at Kroger as a part of a Before the Hedges recruiting special. Really good stuff. Chip talks about Justin Fields, and I do have to – I got to kind of close the book on this with some of my own thoughts on Fields in just a moment. There were a couple things that happened over the weekend that I have to admit I didn't really love, and some of you are going to be saying, well, B.A., why are you still talking about Justin Fields? I feel like this can't pass without me saying this, and then after that, I guess we'll kind of close the book on that. We'll do that coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, let me remind you, speaking of Kroger, by the way, we're coming up on Valentine's. Folks, Valentine's Day is Thursday. So this week, for a couple of days, Wednesday and Thursday, that's the 13th and the 14th, which is the official Valentine's Day, Kroger's got you taken care of. From noon to 6, they've got a chocolate dipping station. Now, I haven't found the thing yet that doesn't taste better once you dip it in chocolate. But you can experiment for yourself on Wednesday and Thursday at Kroger, starting at noon all the way to 6 p.m. And while you're there, taking advantage of the chocolate dipping station, listen, there's no judgment here. You can use the chocolate dipping station for your significant other, but if you just kind of want to, dip your own strawberries in there and take care of yourself and have your own dessert, listen, who are we to say not to do that? But while you are there, you can get that card, flowers, anything else for that special someone in your life. Kroger taking good care of you as we head towards Valentine's Day on Thursday. SEC Through. So I watched a little bit of this. Is it the Alliance of American Football? Is that what the AAF stands for? I can't decide yet if I'm going to like this or not. Now, I love seeing our buddy Cameron Nislek in action. I saw him get a couple punts off and look good doing so. That was kind of a cool thing to see. Our good friend from the post-game show this past year. So we obviously like seeing those SEC names. Mike Johnson, also our buddies, doing some commentary work for the Birmingham team. So I love the SEC connections here. I like seeing guys we know back on the field and playing. And, seeing Spurrier, he had something the equivalent of the visor toss, whatever. Now, he won by like 40 points. I don't know what he had a reason to throw the visor for, but you just saw some of these familiar SEC faces and names, and that's somewhat comforting to me. I can't quite tell yet, though, if this is something I'm going to watch on a regular basis. I don't know. I happened to be home on Saturday night, and I tuned it in for a little bit. They're going to need to score, I think, more regularly on a more regular basis. That's going to be a nice thing. I have no idea why the Atlanta team's not using Aaron Murray as its quarterback. That, to me, is a source of frustration. It feels like that'd be a good way to generate interest from the local audience to have Murray as your starting quarterback. But nonetheless, that's the deal. And you also have the weird thing with Michael Vick, who's not calling plays anymore. I'm not even sure what that's all about. But it happened. There's some SEC guys involved, and I did watch a little bit of it. A couple other stories I wanted to mention. This one for sure SEC related. And this is actually probably pretty good news. Kentucky's defensive coordinator, Matt House, was thought to be a candidate for a linebacker's job. Was it Cincinnati? Is it the place he's supposed to be going? Say again? All right, Kansas City. Yeah, so he's supposed to be okay. So he's supposed to be going to Kansas City as linebackers coach, but apparently now he's not going there. Our buddy Matt Jones from Kentucky Sports Radio has reported this on Twitter. I'm sure this will be spun by Matt once again as Kentucky heroically coming in to throw whatever money it had to at the big bad Kansas City Chiefs to keep Matt House, much the same way they did the same thing with Eddie Grant in Georgia. That's apparently a pretty big deal up there in Lexington, so no doubt Matt Jones will be spinning his yarn, his hero's tale about how Matt House, about how Matt House is just as committed to the future of Kentucky football as Eddie Grant is, and I know that the Music City Bowl or the Birmingham Bowl or the Belk Bowl or whatever the bowl will be very glad to have the Wildcats this year, as both Kentucky coordinators have apparently spurned the big bad behemoths coming in to try to steal them away. So Kentucky can be very happy about that, especially as they cry in their cereal over not getting Anthony Edwards. But nonetheless, one more SEC story I want to get to. Actually, this is not so much SEC related as it is college football related, but pretty interesting nonetheless. So Dabo Swinney was quoted in the Charleston Post and Courier about the PED stuff that some of his players, including Dexter Lawrence, dealt with in the college football playoff. And this seems to be an admission that there's a chance that those substances came from Clemson. Now, here is what Swinney says to the Charleston Post and Courier. Oh, yeah, I mean, there's a chance that it could come from anything, he says. They're going to test everything and look at everything, and that's the problem. As you really look at this stuff, it could be a contaminant that came from anything. That was something that was cleared and not a problem, and all of a sudden, it becomes there was something, meaning a substance within a thing that the Clemson players were given to eat. Now, this is just, me talking, and, we're just having a conversation here. But, boy, it's really hard to hear Dabo Swinney say the things that he says there and not have that sound in your ears like every baseball player from the late 90s and early 2000s who was like, I don't know where this stuff came from. Maybe it just fell out of the sky and landed in my mouth. Who knows where all this stuff comes from? And the best I can tell, every single person in baseball who tried to deny this was proven to be a lie. Some of them lied before Congress. Some of them lied to the media. But they basically were just all liars. And I got no way of knowing what's really going on here with Swinney. But Swinney's got a very interesting brand in college football, especially down here in the South. He seems to be the one doing his program a different way. Remember, Alabama and Georgia are these full contact, aggressive recruiting programs who are making 1,000 offers, and some of those are not committable, and who knows what. It's a race to get the best 25. Dabo, by comparison, always seemed to be a little more touchy-feely than that. He's always seemingly been the guy who's running the good program that wants to love on you, and it's just a better overall vibe and a feeling that Clemson has done. And to its credit, that brand has really worked for it. But when you got Dabo using the same kind of language that we've heard from other sports when it comes to the who knows where these PEDs came from, you almost wonder how much of that is going to stick to him. The honest truth is we don't know. Listen, I don't know the first thing about PEDs, nor do I know how they would have impacted a college player's performance. This is a mystery to me in every regard. But does something like this end up sticking to Dabo Swinney and becoming a difficult thing for him to answer for in the future? And does that good old boy, aw shucks, I'm just Dabo, does that brand that he's built for himself become a little harder to hide behind and hold on to in the face of what was a little bit of an issue for the defending national champion, or the reigning national champions? It'll be worth watching. Make that your SEC 3. All right. So for a couple of minutes here, I do want to talk about one other big story from over the weekend here on DawgNation Daily. And yes, indeed, Justin Fields was granted his immediate eligibility to Ohio State. I got no problem with that. Ultimately, all the reasons for which he made his case, this is probably going to be much ado about nothing. And I was certainly upset with the way that certain media puppets were doing exactly what Fields' attorney wanted them to do in terms of how they were framing the story about Georgia. Ultimately, though, that's probably not going to matter too much, right? Because what the real story is going to be is not the specific circumstances that Fields cited to get eligibility, but the real story is going to be the tidal wave of everyone else joining Fields in this eligibility. So ultimately, Fields is not a special case here. He is just a part of a tidal wave of similar cases, and whatever happened between Fields and what he says about Adam Sasser or whatever, that's probably not going to be a very big part of this, and 6 months from now, no one may remember this. Folks will try to use this as negative recruiting against Georgia, but listen, negative recruiting is one of those things where everybody tries to use everything they can, and for the most part, I don't think this is going to stick to Georgia. But the one thing that I do think Kirby Smart's got to wrestle with privately, and I don't think he's ever going to speak about this publicly. Maybe he shouldn't speak about this publicly. But privately, the one thing that Kirby, I hope, has a good answer for is when he speaks to himself, did I make a mistake by bringing Justin Fields into this program? Given how volatile the situation was from the word go, and we've got video evidence of that, did I make a mistake by even bringing him in? did I damage my locker room or did I risk damage my locker room in having him on this team? I don't fault Fields for wanting to play. I don't fault competitors for wanting to compete. Fromm and Fields competed with each other. Fromm won, Fields lost, and Fields went to Columbus. I'm not mad at anybody for any of this. But Kirby Smart set these events in motion. And I hope privately he's wrestling with, was that a good idea, or was that a situation that could have and should have been avoided? Let me give you a quick tweet as an example of this. McCole Hardman over the weekend was talking about his belief that Fields would win the Heisman Trophy next season at Ohio State. Now, I believe he may have deleted that tweet because I couldn't find that this morning. But certainly what was still up there on Hardman's Twitter account was a defense of his original statement. McCole tweets out, LOL, why y'all trying to start something? Ain't nobody dissing Jake Fromm, he says. That's my guy. Y'all just love to assume things. But the assumption here, when Hardman does tout Fields for the Heisman Trophy over Jake Fromm, that is a choice that Hardman seems to be making over for Fields over Fromm. Ultimately, though, that's probably more of a former Georgia football player just tweeting something that he probably shouldn't have, and I'm sure his relationship with Jake Fromm was really good. But all of this could have been avoided if Georgia had just never pursued Justin Fields in the first place. This experiment to bring him in, who's to say that was really something that Kirby Smart should do? And how will Georgia quarterback recruiting look different going forward? Will these kinds of obvious competitions where neither guy is going to be able to coexist if he's not the starter? Maybe in the future, maybe Kirby Smart would just be better off avoiding all of that all the way around. All right, let me wrap up this way. Around here, we believe the good Georgia fans are Gator haters, and we love that. And, of course, 835 days. That's how long it's been since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. We're awful proud of that. We'll do our Gator Hater Updater each day for you here on DawgNation Daily, and we will see you tomorrow. And on video, really excited to unveil a brand new feature to our video-only portion of the program. We're going to call it the R.S. Andrews Cooldown. We love our friends at R.S. Andrews. They've been great supporters of DawgNation for a long time. Dari's a huge UGA guy who loves traveling with us to a mini game, been with us for the LSU game, was with us for the Notre Dame game, and all kinds of stuff in between. And we sort of embark on a brand new era here on DawgNation Daily with the unveiling of the R.S. Andrews Cool Down as we kind of cool down off the intensity of the show with a few questions and comments. We love doing this. I've told you this before. It's really my favorite part of the day, a chance to allow you to react to anything you want to from the show or anything going on around UGA. I love finding out what you think as I kind of get relaxed again after being in kind of show mode for the last hour or so. So we got a brand new name for this segment. It's the R.S. Andrews Cool Down, and our friends at R.S. Andrews are going to make sure we get to do this for a long time to come. So welcome into the R.S. Andrews Cool Down, and we will look forward to taking your questions and comments on anything you want to discuss here for Georgia. Scott Harris, we're talking about some Star Wars talk in the comment section. Chris Pope says, and this is a very fair question. He says, not bringing a 5-star quarterback, what program would do that? Chris, that's a very fair question. And what that's referenced to is what I was saying before. When Kirby Smart looks at the end of the Justin Fields era, he needs to know for himself and decide for himself, was it a mistake to even bring him in? Well, Chris says, why would you not bring in a 5-star quarterback if you could? Well, you don't bring him in if you know that he's only going to be satisfied if he's the starting quarterback and he's not going to win that starting job. And by the way, Trent Dilfer, we spoke to him a couple of weeks ago down there in Atlanta, downtown for the Super Bowl opening night. We asked Dilfer point blank, were you surprised at how the Fromm and Fields situation played out? Now, keep this in mind. Dilfer and Fields are very close. The way that Fields emerged as the elite prospect that he became was in large measure for how he performed at Trent Dilfer's Elite 11 quarterback camp. So if anyone's success as an analyst and a coach is tied to anyone, Dilfer's would be tied to Fields. But he also likes Fromm too. But Dilfer and Fields are very close. And that night, Dilfer said, no, I'm not surprised by this. I was surprised when he went to Georgia. These guys all think they're going to beat these guys out, and they're not going to do it. That's what Dilfer said about Fields at the time. And Kirby Smart, who presumably ought to know and be able to see, chess moves several spots down the, down the board, if he knew that Fields was mistaken in his belief that he was going to beat out Fromm and that he was only going to be happy with the starting quarterback, then I do think you risked team chemistry by having him in the program. I do. Mark Davis says if we win the championship next year, perhaps we can forget about Fields. And I think for the most part, the eligibility for Fields being granted, I think ends a lot of that discussion for right now. But listen, there's a very good chance that these two quarterbacks could also meet in the college football playoff as well.
To your point on
Connor Riley joins us.
Kirby bringing in Fields. Did Kirby theoretically make a mistake by bringing in Jake Fromm, who's a equally highly rated? Some services had him as a 5-star when he already had Jacob Eason ahead of him.
It's a really fair question, and Robert.
Can you turn that up?
To add this to
yeah, I can't hear him.
What Robert Peel is saying.
No.
No, I can hear you. Okay. Robert Peel, to add to that, says the number one quarterback wants to come to Georgia, and you wouldn't recruit him, really, BA? Listen, I'm not saying that they definitely shouldn't have recruited him, but I think it's a question worth asking. I don't think you're going to see Georgia look to do this again necessarily. I think they're going to look to put some distance between their quarterbacks because this blew up in a really bad way. So much so that you've got former Georgia wide receivers seemingly touting one over the other on Twitter. That's not a good team chemistry situation. And team chemistry may be more valuable in some certain respects than quarterback depth. It doesn't mean that you don't always take the talent. At the time, that's what I said. At the time, I said, hey, if you got a chance to bring in an elite player, you do it. You stockpile talent at every position that you can. But I think you have to allow for opinions to evolve over time when new information comes in. And the new information that's seemingly coming in is that somehow this relationship was never quite, maybe never quite perfect. Now, Connor asked a really good question, which is, well, was it also a mistake to bring in Fromm behind Eason? Obviously, had Eason not gotten hurt, the situation between Eason and Fromm could have also gotten really, really complicated. It just so happened that one worked out really cleanly. Now, I don't mean this, callously and I guess, casually, but Eason got hurt. Fromm came in and played well. It was obvious that he was then going to be the quarterback, and it was obvious that Eason was going to transfer, and he went 3,000 miles from here. So, had that situation not worked out quite as cleanly as it did, there's a chance it could have gotten ugly between Eason and Fromm. So, maybe moving forward, they'll treat quarterback like every other position, where they try to keep bringing in elite players one right after the other, year after year after year. Or maybe they look at this and say, you know what, if you've got part of the team that's going to side with one quarterback and part of the team that's going to side with the other, then maybe you need to make a different choice.
Yeah, I'm not saying your thinking is wrong or anything. I wrote about this morning on Good Day UGA, sort of looking at the differences between Fields and Eason. I think had Georgia made the playoff, I think the Fields transfer timeline would have matched up a little bit more with Eason's in terms of, the day after, it's already being reported. A day after the national championship game, it's already being reported that he's expected to go to Washington. I think if Georgia was in the playoff or vice versa, had they not been in the playoff with Eason, the timelines would have been a little bit similar.
Yeah.
And, admittedly, Fields probably wishes he handled the exit better, but I don't think there's a huge difference between how you should view Fields and how you should view Eason.
That's certainly a fair point to bring up. Monty Moon in the Facebook comment section says, hey, it's me, Captain Hindsight. I want you to understand what I'm saying. I think it's Kirby Smart's job to view things from hindsight. And as I said before, he doesn't owe me an explanation about what his true thoughts on this are, nor will he ever grant one to any of us. But while it may be hindsight and speculation on our part to say, here's what Georgia should have done with Justin Fields, this really matters for Kirby Smart because part of a coach's job is to manage the egos you have on a team. Not just the ego of Fields, but the ego of everybody else and how those players relate to each other. It's a big part of coaching, especially when you coach talented rosters. If you're coaching some middling program, your only job is to find better players. But once you're at Georgia and you have a roster of elite talent, your job then becomes to find a way for these guys all to coexist together. And I'm sorry, that video of Justin Fields after the South Carolina game in his, second ever college game, SEC opener, complaining about not getting more playing time, not being more part of the offense, there's a chance that hurt Georgia's team chemistry this year. It just is. At the time, I wasn't aware of that. At the time, I was really glad to have Fields. At the time, I was really looking to see Fields have an expanded role in the offense as the season progresses. But it didn't happen. Whatever Georgia did with Fields, for better or for worse, was wrong. It was wrong. When they did use him, they didn't use him effectively. And you can say, well, they should have used him more, they should have used him less, whatever. But how they used him is wrong. So in the hindsight of all of this, I hope that Kirby Smart is asking himself some tough questions. I hope Kirby Smart is saying, if I had to do it all over again, this is what I would do. This is what I would do different. And if the answer to that is, hey, listen, I want to keep recruiting as many good players as I can, and we'll let the guy that loses the quarterback competition leave the program. If that's the right answer, that's fine. But hopefully Kirby Smart is asking those questions to himself as we roll through the R.S. Andrews cooldown here on DawgNation Daily.
Yeah, I just, I don't know if he needs to, make a decision of whether or not it was the right move or the wrong move to bring in Fields. I just hope that, he learns from it. Again, he's only been a head coach for 3 years. The guys he's chasing down, have a significant advantage in sort of that experience factor. And I'd like, you just hope Kirby, he learns from this one way or another, and if presented a similar situation in the future, he handles it better.
Now, let me correct one thing that I believe may be a little bit of a misinterpretation. Rick Martin says to you, he says, wrong, Connor. What makes Eason different from Fields was Eason was not prepared to drag UGA through the mud like Fields was. Fields hired a lawyer, Eason did not. So, Connor, let me say what I believe I know about Justin Fields in that situation, and we will see if you agree with me on this. I think Fields camp threatened to drag Georgia through the mud, but I don't believe they ever actually did. I think they did some saber rattling initially to sort of show their hand and show they wanted to be aggressive, but ultimately this thing kind of came about without them having to do a whole lot of stuff through the media and a whole lot of stuff publicly. As I said before, I think the public at large 6 months from now has forgotten whatever reasons that Fields suggests that he wanted to be eligible to Ohio State, because ultimately what Fields really wanted was Ohio State eligibility, and he just kind of made up the reason to get what he wanted. So I don't think we can blame Fields too much for the way they went about this, because ultimately this actually didn't play itself out very publicly. It started off that way. I think the Fields camp used willing accomplices in the media, work for hire reporters to make their case for them. But once this thing was set in motion, they've been pretty quiet about it since then. Fields spoke on Friday and didn't say a ton one way or another.
Yeah, he issued his first public statements on his time at Georgia, said he was grateful for the opportunity to be a Bulldog and thanked a lot of his friends there. I don't think we're ever going to hear about what, the pitch was, to get him to play at Ohio State. And as far as, the potential of dragging Georgia through the mud and whatnot, I mean, Eason wanted to go closer to home to Washington, but it didn't really make sense for him to push for a waiver to play right away because he wasn't going to play over Jake Browning, who was a 3-year returning starter. Now, if he had known maybe he could play right away, that maybe changes the calculus on it. But in life, you just got to play the hand you're dealt. And that was a hand that was available to Fields. And while you might not like that he could have theoretically played it, like Fields wants to play. Every 18-year-old, every 5-star, every 3-star for that matter, wants to play college football. They want to start. And when when you're being as touted as a guy like Fields is and mentioned as a potential NFL draft prospect, you have to just try and find a way to get on the field. And I think you should be able to use anything and everything at your disposal. And just unfortunately, the optics didn't look great for UGA, and it played out that way. But I don't think we're ever going to hear about – I don't think we're ever going to hear Fields say a bad word about Georgia going forward. I don't think we're going to hear anything on that.
Yeah. And
I just don't think we're going to hear much about, what was said. And to your point about this sort of opening the transfer portal box, I think if Tate Martell, the Ohio State, who was talking tough about Fields going there and then transferred quicker, rather cowardly in my opinion, if he's granted immediate eligibility at Miami, I think that's the one that opens the box for everything and just says, we're not going to fight this. There was no way for us to do this. If you want to transfer, you can play right away.
And I think that probably is going to happen. It's one of the reasons why I think the specific reasons for Fields eventually get forgotten. Let me change the subject for a moment and talk about the other big news of the weekend, which is what just happened a few minutes ago, is Anthony Edwards committed to Georgia Live in the DawgNation video channels. Now, Connor, first of all, I got to ask you, how impressed you with my props? The 1991 Georgia program, the Herrick era car magnet.
I am impressed. I was surprised to see you make an effort with the Georgia basketball, diving all in.
So when I was younger, I actually used to go to a lot of Georgia basketball games. Went to a decent amount in the Hugh Durham era. Went to virtually every home game in the Tubby Smith era. Virtually every home game in the Jim Herrick era. And since then, Georgia basketball hasn't been quite as worth the 1.5-hour drive from Atlanta to Athens to get there. So this is the question I want to ask, and I want people to be firmly honest. I want total honesty. That's one of the hallmarks of the R.S. Andrews cooldown. We got to have total honesty. How is the Edwards news going to change the way you interact with Georgia basketball? Whether people admit this or not, there are some people who are going to say It is going to do nothing for me whatsoever. I don't care about basketball if they had 5 Anthony Edwards playing on the team. I only care about football. And if that's the case, then that's a fine thing to admit. You know, people are allowed to like what they want to like, and, you know, they can reject what they want to reject. That's fine. But I am curious with those people who say, you know what, I haven't really paid that much attention to Georgia basketball before, but the highlights we showed of Edwards a little earlier, the presence of a player like that on the Georgia roster, that's going to get me to buy some tickets to Stegman Coliseum. That's going to get me to be in that gym in a way that I wouldn't have earlier. And listen, it's not my job to push Georgia tickets. It's their job to sell the tickets. I'm not here to tout for Georgia in that regard. But I am pretty curious to find out what Edwards' presence does to change the way that people view Georgia basketball. For the most part, people have chosen to ignore it, for better or for worse, and some people complain that I don't talk enough about basketball in the program. The reason why I don't is because, for the most part, my audience has said that's not what they want. I wonder if Edwards' presence means people want a little bit more basketball. Will people embrace this a little bit more? I'm really curious to see that.
I will. So he's a transcendent Georgia basketball player, a huge win for the program. He's getting comparisons to James Harden, who's currently maybe one of the 5 best players in the NBA, maybe even top 3. If I could just pump the brakes a little bit on this whole Georgia's back, or whatever the equivalent of that is to a program that hasn't had a lot of sustained basketball success. Do you know how many NCAA tournament games the last 3 number 1 overall NBA draft picks have won?
This is a very interesting stat. Tell us.
0.
Yeah.
DeAndre Ayton lost in the first round. Markelle Fultz did not make the NCAA tournament. Ben Simmons did not make the NCAA tournament.
Now, Arizona was still a pretty high seed. They just happened to get
They
upset.
were a 4 seed, and they got blown out in the first round.
So the odds are, in terms of big-time tournament success for Georgia next season, it's probably not going to come. In fact, I think the overall projections for Georgia next season will still have them outside the NCAA tournament bubble. That's what I'm going to assume. However, you can't deny, based on the footage that we just saw, this is the most exciting player.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, and there's something to be said for that. There's something to be said for a guy that's flying around dunking, even if it doesn't lead to a lot of tournament success. It's going to be hard to ignore this product if a player like that's that much fun to watch. Compared to like a Contavious Caldwell-Pope, who himself was, an NBA lottery pick. But I think of Pope as more of a shooter, whereas like Anthony Edwards seems to be a guy that wants to go to the front of the rim with authority. That's just a different kind of prospect, and the kind of thing that can certainly recruit fans, even if it doesn't necessarily generate the big-time performances in March.
Yeah, and I will say he seems a little different than the Fultz Simmons, in the sense that those guys were both kind of quiet, wanted to go about their business. He is very energetic and very, demonstrative about how he wants Georgia basketball to be a success. And I do think that there are the potential for pieces there next year. Nicholas Claxton and Rashawn Hammers are 2 very good forwards, 2 guys that can play. Tyreek Crump, who you would think would be coming back, and I know his mother was very critical of the comments Tom Crean made over the weekend. He's going to be a good point guard to pair with Edwards, someone of his skill, because he's both a great spot-up shooter and he's someone who, won't force Edwards to be the primary ball handler all the time. There are pieces here for Georgia. They're also bringing in 2 more 4-star guys, and Edwards mentioned that he's trying to bring 2 unnamed recruits to Georgia as well. So, personally, I think just making the NCAA tournament next year for Crean with a guy like Edwards and so the talent he's bringing back, I think that should be the goal. And if they do that, that is a success. All
right, a couple thoughts here. Justin Kyle Haley referencing the fact that Edwards played in the low-level high school classification in Georgia. Where Edwards plays high school basketball is totally irrelevant. It could not matter less. It's not high school football where you do prove yourself a lot in the games that you play. High school basketball is completely irrelevant compared to the AAU scene that he's been a part of, where the elite prospects come from. That's the level of recruiting reservoir that the Mark Foxes and the Dennis Feltons of the world either weren't granted access to, given permission to head in towards, or just simply couldn't get in the door on that. So that's what matters here. It's the AAU circuit that Edwards has been a part of, and that's what's exciting about this. I'll give you 3 more quick thoughts, because we've also got Billy Hurley in the Facebook comment section says, and back to football. And that's certainly fine, and maybe that's what this end up being. The kind of thing where the fan base, by and large, rejects the Edwards news to remain strictly devoted to football, and that could end up being where this goes, and it may take more than just one Anthony Edwards to change the overall feelings of the Georgia fan base on that. But there were 3 quick things on Edwards that I wanted to make mention of. First of all, I love the way that he referenced the closeness of his home to the Athens campus, just 85 miles away, he said. That's been true for a lot of big-time prospects, but the close-to-home factor didn't really seem to matter much for them. Imagine how Georgia basketball is going to be changed if all of a sudden people say, oh, really is just a short drive down 316 across the state, and I can be at a place that's a comfortable home for me. That could really change the future and the feelings about Georgia basketball in a big way. I also was really struck by just how much Edwards vouched for Tom Crean. He specifically spoke of Crean as being the reason that he wanted to go to Georgia, that he was not interested in Georgia before Crean and became heavily interested in Georgia because of Crean. If Edwards feels that way, there's an assumption that other recruits could one day feel that way as well. And that speaks to what Tom Crean's going to be able to do. As I said before, I stand by what I said about Crean's comments on Saturday. They were a little bit seemingly distasteful, but that doesn't mean they were dishonest. There is a chance that Crean really is just totally dissatisfied with the talent level on his roster, and he wanted to send a message to the important former players and coaches in the building to say, we are changing this program for the better, and I'm going to fight like mad to get it done, much the same way that Kirby Smart has in football. And players like Anthony Edwards are going to be you're going to become more accustomed to seeing those in the Georgia uniform. And guys that don't fit into the current level of SEC play, they've got no place in the Georgia program. I think that was a really interesting thing to hear Edwards vouch for Crean 2 days after Crean was pretty critical of the current state of Georgia basketball. And then one more point, I know that Connor wants to weigh in on this, but one more point. I think it really does speak pretty well of Edwards, and he spoke about this himself, about wanting to be the first one to kind of carve a new path, going to Georgia and being a part of a foundational aspect of the Georgia program. It takes a lot not to want to just follow Zion Williamson to Duke or follow Ashton Hagans to Kentucky and these programs that seemingly get the best players year after year after year. It takes a lot not just want to go where the masses have been going, and by masses I mean the number of people that kind of qualify as a prospect similar to Edwards. It takes a lot to want to be your own man, but the Ant-Man apparently wants to do that. And no matter how this ultimately ends up, and I mean 5-10 years from now, does he become a transformational figure for Georgia basketball? The fact that he's going to try this, I think, speaks pretty well about the character the young man has. And one day he could become the kind of player that we all look back on and say, wow, where would Georgia basketball be if Anthony Edwards hadn't made the decision that he made?
Two quick things on this. I asked Edwards, do you want to have a sort of similar effect that Kirby Smart had at Georgia about sort of re-energizing the program and, getting that buy-in with regards to Georgia basketball? He said absolutely. He wants that same kind of effect where it is an event every single time Georgia basketball is on the floor. Two, an interesting little nugget. So Georgia signed the number 1 overall player in the football class of 2019 in Nolan Smith. Edwards is the number 2 overall prospect right now and has a very good chance of becoming the number 1 overall player.
Yeah.
If Georgia were to, if Edwards ascends to the number 1 ranking, Georgia would become the first program in the recruiting era history, which basically dates back to 2003, to sign the number 1 overall player in football and the number 1 overall player in basketball. USC, interestingly enough, in 2007 signed the number 1 overall football player in Joe McKnight, the number 2 overall basketball player in OJ Mayo.
Okay,
so
yeah.
UGA is in some very rarefied history here as both a football and a basketball player.
Scott Harris says, I'll just be excited when he signs on the dotted line. As we
April
said,
17th.
Yeah, as we've said before, basketball is just a different recruiting world than football is. My assumption is, based on the way that most of these things work out, Kentucky will probably just stop recruiting him because, for the most part, the basketball guys just don't flip the same way the football guys do. Now, people say, well, Hagans did it last year, but that was almost, to me, solely related to the coaching change of Fox going out. Hagans liked Fox, and therefore he chose a new home when Fox left the program. But for the most part, these guys just don't really flip commitments very much. Just, I don't follow basketball recruiting that closely, but overall, it's just a very, very different thing to do. All right, we have got a little bit of time left in our R.S. Andrews cool down, so we'll now change subjects again and turn away from the basketball stuff for a moment and get heavily into the football world for the final couple of minutes. And I'm curious to find out from you. Do you agree with what I said earlier in the program, that there's a symbolic value to bringing in Lawrence Cager? We don't know yet what Cager's going to do at the wide receiver position. I love having the extra body. I do like the fact that he's put up some numbers as a part of a Miami offense far inferior to the one that Georgia has. I like that. I told you before when it comes to Eli Wolf, the grad transfer tight end from Tennessee, that for the most part, I don't know that he's a better player than the tight ends that Georgia already has on its roster. But as Jeff said on Friday, it's his veteran presence that's a value here. And this does seem to signify that Georgia wants to have every stone unturned in its pursuit of a national championship in 2019. The phrase that I used was the win now mode. Georgia seems to be in that right now. I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. And you can weigh in on that as we get ready to go here as a part of our R.S. Andrews cool down on this
While
Friday.
the comments
Monday,
roll in,
I mean. Go ahead.
I don't use this phrase lightly, but if Georgia doesn't win a national championship next year, is it seen as a disappointment?
I think we're at a level now as a fan base around DawgNation where it's always going to be a disappointment. That you can say, well, Georgia on paper is closer to that than they've ever been under Kirby Smart. That may be true, but this is the kind of boom or bust mindset that Georgia has now. There are a small number of college football fan bases that probably can justifiably feel this way, where it's a disappointment if you don't win a national championship. But Georgia has now risen to that. The 2017 run was the, hey, let's catch them by surprise and let's have more success than people think is possible. But once you break through that barrier, after that, everything is, what have you done for me lately? And that's not necessarily seemingly fair always, but Kirby Smart knew what he was signing up for when he took this job, for sure. Dimitri Sullivan says, hey, BA, YouTube's alive. Hey, we're on YouTube right now. We're taking care of those comments. Larry Goldberg says, is our win now mode similar to Saban's win now mode? Yeah, I mean, certainly it is kind of funny to see both these programs, Alabama and Georgia, in kind of slightly different ways, kind of aligning everything to make a big run this year. I think that once you get past Tua Tagovailoa as quarterback for Alabama, the next generation of quarterback, the Paul Tysons, the Talia Tagovailoas, I don't believe they have the same caliber of prospect. I think that Alabama takes a step down in quarterback play, presumably after this year when Tagovailoa moves on to the NFL. The heir apparent is not the same kind of player. So you're right. I think Alabama is gearing up for a major run right now. But this may be a situation where both programs can let the chips fall where they may. In December in Atlanta for the 2019 SEC Championship, Alabama is probably somewhere between a 3 and a 6-point favorite in that game right now. That's probably about what that would be, which is the kind of thing where anything can happen. Alabama's still a little better on paper, maybe, but absolutely ready to get Georgia's best shot, it would seem. Eric Rio asked an interesting question. Eric M. Rio says, BA, why do you do the show on this set when you have an even better set decked out with UGA gear? That's a good question. Why don't we do DawgNation Daily on the other set? That's a good question. It used to be that was obviously designed for other shows, and now it's just an extra DawgNation set. Should we reconsider that? I wonder. The one thing about that set that's a little bit different is that the screen, this is more than y'all care to know, but the screen on the other side is stationary. You can't move that around, whereas this screen can kind of be repositioned depending on if you have one person sitting here, two people sitting here. There's a little bit of flexibility with that. Maybe one day we'll consider that. That's a very interesting question to ask. Very interesting question. Tram Dickerson on YouTube says, if we don't win the national championship 2019, we will do what it takes for the next year, but Kirby hates losing more than us all. That's true. I don't think that Georgia's necessarily all that less talented in 2020, just going to be some different names. You have to replace Andrew Thomas, which is likely a very big deal, because I do think in almost all likelihood Thomas leaves after this year. That's the one thing you have going for you in 2019 that you may not have going for you in 2020. Elite Baller, thanks for checking in. He's getting ready to bounce out of here. We appreciate that. Thanks for being a part of the R.S. Andrews cool down. John McMillan says one of the things that helps Georgia in 2019 is the fact that the Clemson defense won't be as dominant. Yeah, that's certainly true. Amos Williams says, BA, we're much better on paper than Alabama this year. National title or bust, no excuses. I agree with both those last two sentiments. I do think it's a national title or bust and no excuses. I don't think, though, that when you look at, former 4- and 5-star prospects, when you look at, returning production, I don't think it's a clear-cut advantage for Georgia against Alabama in that regard, which is why I said on a neutral field, Alabama's probably still a slight favorite. Probably not as high as, as a 6, but maybe somewhere in that 3-point range or so over Georgia. But that's not the kind of game that, Georgia's destined to lose if it's a slight underdog to Alabama. Let me get a couple more, and we'll get ready to wrap up our R.S. Andrews cool down here for this day. And huge thanks to R.S. Andrews for making this comment section possible. Just goes to show you how much people are having a good time with the comments each and every day. Steve Shavini says we need a band. Yeah, how cool would that be to have we had a live band kind of over here? I wouldn't mind that. I grew up on the late night TV with the live bands. It seems like a lot of the late night shows these days don't do the live bands anymore. Like who's the ex-SNL guy who's on late night on NBC? I don't think he has a band. Seems like some of the guys have kind of gotten out of out of the band world, but I like that on the late night scene. James Bryant says, what does R.S. Andrews do? R.S. Andrews is heating and air, plumbing, electrical. So when you got any kind of issues like that going on at your home, they got a $99 air conditioning tune-up and a furnace tune-up. We're coming up on what's going to be the cool weather season here pretty soon. Like the other day, it just popped up to 80 degrees out of nowhere. A lot of folks cranking on that air conditioner for one day to kind of cool their house down. And you know what? After a few months of not working it, not using that air conditioner, when you flip that switch, turn that thing on, not everybody's AC runs the way it needs to. And you want to make sure when the hot weather does get here that your air conditioning is running the way it's supposed to. So that's what R.S. Andrews will come out and do. An example of one of the things they do is they'll come out and just make sure your air conditioning is ready for the spring to come and the summer months when you're running that thing all the time. They'll take good care of you on that. Or right now, if you're dealing with some of that cold weather and that furnace is not keeping your house as cool or as warm as it needs to, they'll take good care of you on that front too. They got trained expert technicians who will come out to your house and just make sure everything with all your systems is running the way that it's supposed to. We love our friends at R.S. Andrews, Dari and the guys over there. Great folks. Chad Baker brings up a good point. We forgot to mention this during the show today. We need to. That Derek Ansley is taking the job as assistant coach at Tennessee. And that's something we need to spend some more time on tomorrow. And the hustle and bustle of getting all the Anthony Edwards news out there, we kind of overlooked that. But we'll have a lot of extended thoughts on Ansley tomorrow. Chad, thanks for weighing in on that. That is definitely a subject we have not talked enough about as of yet. Let me see if we can get ready to get one or two more here. Antoine Middleton says, in terms of getting over losses, I just got over the 2017 loss to Alabama this past week. Yeah, a lot of these really stick with us for sure. There's no question about that. No question about that. Dimitri Sullivan says, B.A. Claxton and Edwards will be a great show to watch in the Stegman Coliseum. Both possible lottery picks following the draft. I think this team is going to be a lot of fun to watch for sure. I think they're going to be a lot of fun to watch. A lot of fun to watch. So that should be very interesting to see. All right, we're going to get ready to wrap up the R.S. Andrews cool down for today. We'll be back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily Live. We will have a lot more thoughts on everything happening around UGA. Connor, you got any final words before we go here?
It's a good day for Georgia athletics program as a whole. Adding Cager, clearly pushing more chips in to win in 2019, which I think they need to do. Landing a generation of basketball. It's a good time to be a Georgia.
I think that's really true. Well said by Connor. We appreciate all of you being with us as part of our R.S. Andrews cool down. We'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily Live. Don't forget, more on Edwards, more on the transfer additions to Georgia and everything else happening around UGA. Check out DawgNation.com, and we'll see you again tomorrow morning. Have a great day, everybody.